MEITY released a draft second amendment to the ID Rules 2021 for public consultation on Monday. The amendments propose making ministerial advisories binding on platforms, extending the digital media ethics code to ordinary users who post news, and expanding the government's oversight machinery. This is Vrinda Tulsian for ThePrint, and I'm joined by Rohit Kumar, co founder of the Quantum Hub, and Meghna Bal, director of the Esya Centre. Welcome to you both. First question that I have is to you both. The government has called it clarificatory in nature, but is it really like what does that mean? So, have has this something that has been going on in practice anyway, or does this make things a bit more clear? So, Meghna, if you want to go first, and then Rohit.
Yeah, so to some extent, I mean, we've already seen the MIB issuing blocking orders for content that is on intermediary platforms. But to be clear, this is not clarificatory in the sense that advisories, directions, and things like that have never been binding. The nature of those documents, I mean, inherently is that they haven't been binding, and this shifts that position. So basically, it says that any kind of direction, clarification, advisory issued by MEITY is now binding. So that is a distinction as well. There are some other changes, of course, that have been made where part three, like I said, although it was being done in practice, at least MIB was doing it in practice. Now, part three under the IDC, there's a lot of other ministries that come into play as well. So now, whether they will also be able to issue blocking orders is an open question. And whether it's now only going to, I mean, but whether MEITY no longer has the sole jurisdiction, at least on the intermediary front, is now not the sole jurisdiction, sorry, because MIB was already issuing, but whether that is now extended to other ministries is also an open question.
Yeah. Uh, and if I may come in, I agree with Meghna. I don't think it is clarifying, to be honest, too many things. The only thing perhaps where it is clarifying a little bit, it is saying that, the part where it talks about data retention, where the law is in conflict with other laws, that is the part it is clarifying that your requirements under this law stand irrespective of what it says in the Data Protection Act and otherwise. It's a different matter whether we agree with that position or we think that's good in practice. Having said that, I don't think it's clarifying. The second thing is that even the way this is worded, to be honest, I had to read it 5 times to even be able to make sense of what was happening. And I think it also speaks to the fact that we now, the rules, IT rules themselves, are longer than the act in itself. And they have undergone so many iterations and amendments that it is hard to make sense of what are we trying to do. And then, as Meghna said, you cannot make advisories binding in law. That's actually bad legal precedent and could create more uncertainty because advisories can be issued on the fly and they could be interpreted in very different ways. I can understand when you want to sort of look at, say, SOPs. For the NCII content, there is a certain SOP which the government would like to follow, but advisories and those terms are so wide. So I think, apart from the legal questions, this is more confusing than anything else.
Just to add to what Rohit said, sorry if I may. Yeah, I
Yeah, yeah,
mean,
of
the
course.
confusion also comes from the fact that it's unclear whether on these advisories, directions, etc., there's going to be consultation, because typically there hasn't been. And while it says that these must be in writing, it is unclear whether they will all be released to the public, because again, that is something that has not been followed in the past. Some advisories have become public, some have not. So those are two things that make it a little more murky and therefore a little more uncertain. And of course, like Rohit said, because these things are kind of made on the fly, they tend to be reactive. They may also not be completely thought out in terms of what the unintended consequences might be. So, for instance, they issued an advisory in March 2024, which basically created a licensing regime for AI systems, which is ludicrous. And of course, then the other thing, of course, is that it is already a question as to whether MEITY is empowered to issue these types of documents or these types of rules. It is a question because it doesn't come clearly under any of the rulemaking powers or any of the other powers that are given under the Act. and precedent is very clear on that. Now, to make them binding, of course, then adds another layer of uncertainty there. And the other thing, just to add to what Rohit was saying, it was confusing for us as well because there's a lot of cases that have been filed against the rules, and a lot of parts have been stayed. And the inclusion of, particularly related to the IDC, it's interesting actually if you think about it, because section 9.1 and 9.3, which kind of form the basis of 14, 15, and 16, which is the operative part of what is being discussed here, where intermediaries are going to be held to account by the IDC or by the MIB or any ministry within the IDC. Section 9, 1 and 3 was stayed. So until that is taken care of, I don't see how this part works, whether it's
Yeah.
clarificatory or not. And it's very confusing from that perspective as well. For instance, 9, 1 and 3 say that it only applies to publishers. Now you've extended the application to intermediaries without considering the fact that the main provision that kind of gives the basis to these other provisions has been stayed. So it's all a bit murky. It's the antithesis of clarificatory in a sense.
And I think the biggest pushback that even right now we see on social media against these rules has been that, okay, now ordinary users are put to the same test and standards as publishers, right? So, what does that actually mean in practice? Like, what really happens if I am an ordinary user and I put XYZ sort of current affair or any news thread, Twitter thread on it? So, do I also come under this now?
So, if I may sort of come in there, so the way it has been worded, it is that it is basically saying they want to extend the definition of what is a publisher, and publishers typically do more due diligence on the content that is put up on their platforms before it goes out. Like for instance, as all media houses, including print, would have certain norms in terms of checking what is going out. Users, general users, for instance, when they comment on current affairs, news, etc., obviously don't do that kind of checking, but they're reporting in the moment. Some of these also lead to breakthrough stories that may not have happened otherwise, right? Because they report from the ground, etc. But what the amendment does is it says that intermediaries where such news content is being posted, by platforms like YouTube, platforms like social media, other social media, and this content will now come under the purview. And if the ministry feels that there is some kind of violation, then it can be sent to the committee, and if the committee recommends, it can be taken down. Now this is a very problematic thing because the problem and see the in theory, and the government's argument is that a lot of news is circulating on these platforms. Traditional platforms are regulated, but these are not, so there is a level playing field problem, and a lot of fake news is sort of coming out. That's a fair argument. The problem is when you open these kinds of doors, it is also potential to misuse, especially when your institutional structures are not robust. Now, the way this has been designed is MIB, Ministry of Information Broadcasting, can raise a complaint. The committee can recommend. The Ministry of Broadcasting Information then takes a decision, then asks for a takedown. So there is judge, jury, all of that is happening, and ultimately you can misuse that provision to silence critics, to silence people who potentially are exposing things that are going wrong. So from a citizen lens, I would be worried that this is probably disproportionate in terms of trying to the problem that you're trying to solve, and what chilling effect on speech you can have.
What about you,
Yeah, just
Meghna? What do you think? Yeah.
yeah, just want to add there. I mean, what is also problematic is how widely defined news and current affairs content is in the rules, right? It basically is any newly received or noteworthy content, including analysis and about recent events, etc., whatever. Some of it refers to news, but anything that is socio-political, economic, cultural in nature, but anything that is newly received or noteworthy, which means that it's any content. How do you define news when the ambit that has been given by the definition under the rules is so broad? So literally anything can come under this, including, I mean, especially when you bring cultural elements into it. So it's not just about drawing parity with what is aired on broadcast or anything like that. This goes well beyond the ambit of that, right? This is basically almost any user generated content. So that is the other, of course, concerning part, um, where it basically extends the scope of executive discretion over anything that anyone says online. And that I do not think would, I mean, stand up to any test of constitutional scrutiny.
And we do see that. So, of course, the advisories have now been made binding, right? So, but then there is organizations, social media intermediaries like X, which are constantly fighting in the court against what they believe as, unproportionate takedown, disproportionate takedowns, and also something that shouldn't be taken down. So I think even like 2 3 days ago, they had spoken in the court against the removals, right? So what happens to those kind of cases that the social media intermediaries might be fighting in the court? Do they still like stand, or would the intermediaries also now back down because the advisories are becoming more and more binding in nature?
So, firstly, this has not been passed. My sense is that even this will be taken to court. So,
Hmm.
I don't think it will sort of
Yeah.
substantially
Yeah.
subtract from anything that is under litigation. I can guarantee that the moment this is passed, this will go to court. And to the point that Meghna was saying earlier, see, even part three earlier, when it was put in, the idea was that, and you have to understand part three for the lay readers, basically saying that a publisher is publishing news and say a user has a complaint. There is first a self-regulatory, like a complaint mechanism where you write to the publisher doesn't address it, so there is a self-regulating body of publishers where a group of publishers come together, then the complaint goes there, and if they don't resolve it, it goes to the oversight committee. And the argument that litigants had taken to court is to say that media's independence is critical to the health of democracy. The last thing that you need is at the top of this complaint pyramid, the government sits in decision making authority to push media to take down stuff, and it has been held at that stage. Now what we are seeing in these rules is an extension of that same idea, which is that what is news and current affairs is essentially media reporting, right? The moment you start having the government sort of come on top, it is likely to cause too many problems. So I would
Hmm.
argue my money would be on the fact that this is going to be taken to court, and it's not going to reduce litigation in any way.
What about you, Meghna?
See, I think that, I mean, of course, yes, it is definitely going to be challenged, and it may actually then be,
Hmm.
or they may attempt to kind of transfer the petition if it's filed in a high court to the Supreme Court and kind of bind it with all the other litigation that you mentioned that is currently ongoing regarding the IT rules. But the other thing that I think decision makers need to take cognizance of is that the internet and, I mean, the online world is no longer de-linked from the offline world, in the sense that commerce online or commerce offline is very, very intrinsically linked to commerce online. So
Hmm.
small businesses depend on platforms to market their products. There's studies that show that that value that is generated is going to go up to about $1 trillion by 2030. And so if you kind of refuse to acknowledge, or you don't take into account the fact that there is this interlinkage, and you create an environment that is extremely uncertain for online content across media, whether it be curated content or not, it starts creating a problem for the businesses that are market using those platforms to market their content. So it creates vagueness and uncertainty, which then makes it hard to price risk, which then makes it, and which then chills investment, which then reduces efficiency, sorry, creates high transaction costs, and ultimately chills investment. And so I think that measured governance is always the better path, especially when it is a medium that is so now important to what is happening offline, and particularly your small businesses, which is the backbone of your economy. So I don't think that an environment where basically there is governance by fiat, which is what the advisories would turn it into, because they would come out quickly, they would be sweeping in nature from what we've seen thus far, and they, like I said, would not be cognizant of the unintended impact. So we don't know what the knock-on effects are going to be. And if those things are not thought through carefully, then there are going to be further problems that are going to cascade through the value chains that depend on these platforms.
And just two more questions. So, does compliance also become an issue in such a case? Because we've seen the other amendments as well that came out in Feb, and now these ones. So, does it become tougher for like the intermediaries also to operate with such kind of amendments coming in? Because then there is a lot of just combing through the social media all the time, because now you have to check users, you have to check a lot of things that is going on, right? And also like comply to a lot of advisories, to a lot of orders that the government might be sending in. So does it anywhere create a compliance mess as well?
Yeah,
It
massive.
does.
Sorry.
Yeah, Meghna, why don't you go ahead? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Well, just actually, I'm glad you brought up the SGI rules because, to my point earlier, we've spoken to small businesses and they've said that now the SGI rules are creating massive problems for them because everyone is using AI to make their ads. So basically,
Hmm.
even their ad content qualifies as SGI content, which means that now it comes under the purview of the rules and has to comply with XYZ,
Hmm.
whatever. And the thing is that even if there is obviously there will be an additional compliance burden, especially because there will be uncertainty. There will be certain things that may be rolled back, functionalities may decrease. But even if the flip side of that is that the platforms might start pushing their compliance burden onto the people who are using them, onto the users, which again may adds more friction. It makes it hard, particularly for commerce. So yes, there is obviously going to be more compliance burden. And the thing is that when you change the interface of a platform, it takes time. It takes time to implement these things. But the expectation, particularly for advisories, is going to be immediate implementation, which doesn't reconcile with the nature of product changes because you have to test it, you have to evaluate it, you have to see if legal can pass it. All of those things have to happen. You have to, and of course, if you're a multinational company, then there are teams across countries that are going to be looking at it because you don't want to sacrifice function, you don't want to add friction, but in some cases you may not be able to uh, there may be no other way. So there is going to be an additional compliance burden. I don't know how it's going to reconcile with the expectation of immediate implementation. I'll stop there.
And even these simple things like data retention provisions that you've changed.
Yeah.
Now every time you change anything like this, or the another law says something else, the point is workflows have to be reconfigured. Now you have to decide in which use cases do you need to retain data, which use cases do you not need to retain data. And if tomorrow a complaint comes and you've not retained data, you can be taken to court. So there are very significant costs associated with any of this, and then obviously companies will have to be more wary. Then increasingly there are more timelines associated with certain kinds of takedowns, etc. So there also you have to change processes. Like in the SGI rules, the synthetically generated information rules that came in, they reduced timelines to 2 to 3 hours, right? No, so now the only way an intermediary can take down content in that is pretty much automated. For that, some platforms have already created APIs with government systems to say the moment a request comes in, we will take it down. But now these many of these platforms are operating across the globe in different jurisdictions. Then it is hard, and the tech product or needs to, as Meghna said, seamlessly connect.
And just one more thing, now we're hearing that the timeline is going to be reduced to 1 hour. So again, like I said, just on invoking the SGI rules again, if since everyone is using AI to create ads or create creative content that is completely benign for marketing purposes, there are going to be false positives and their things are going to be taken down. So how do you now reconcile with that as well, right? Because the intermediary's only thing is that I want to ensure that my due diligence is met, I want to comply, and yes, of course they are going to have to automate it. So then what do you do there? It's a huge problem.
And one last question that I have is coming back to how ordinary users also technically come under the digital media ethics code, right? So now these codes are sort of something that takes from the press code, from the cable TV rules, right? So does everyone now come under these rules? And how does user behavior also change? Because in a country like India, we also see these really small influencers cropping up even in villages, in urban areas, and they usually do a lot of good critical reporting, in the sense that they will report on civic issues, on issues that we absolutely, as journalists sitting in Delhi, we have no idea about, because there is a regional divide, there is a language divide. So a lot of times we also pick our news from these creators. A lot of times we will share Twitter posts with each other and say that, oh, this sounds really interesting, why don't we do it at a national level? So what changes? Is the user behavior going to change? Can we see like these influencers now stopping to like do such work or something of that sort?
If I may come in, and then Meghna, I would also like your perspective. So, to be honest, Vrinda, it's not clear to me how this is going to work, because the way that amendment is drafted, it says that only, I think, clause 14, 15, 16 of part 3 applies, which means that they have pulled in user content and intermediaries in the definition of publisher, but only to the extent that their complaints against them can be escalated to a committee who can then ask MIB to take that content down. So to be honest, I do want to step back and say that this is becoming an increasing mess with the kind of amendments we are doing to the IT rules and creating this hodgepodge where even trained policy and legal professionals have to read it 5 times to understand what is happening. So the way I read it right now, and I am stand happy to be corrected, is that content, the way I don't think the code applies. It is saying is that if there is a complaint, MIB can flag it, because it says any other matter can be referred to the committee, and then the committee can make certain recommendations, and then that action can be taken. The only thing I see from all of this, I don't think that the stated goal of reducing fake news is going to be met. Also, because the pace at which news spreads, content takedowns is the least effective method of sanitizing the digital environment. The only effective method of sanitizing the digital environment is to work with platforms or nudge them to be safer by design. X, for instance, I don't agree with a lot of things X does, but some of the community notes have shown, efficacy during the wartime, when people have commented under it, and some of those notes are helping readers interpret it. But basically, fake news cannot be addressed by takedown. So if MEITY, or if the government's hope is that by bringing this amendment, they can cut fake news and deep fakes, I feel that will not happen. What it is simply doing, it is giving the government an avenue to take down content, which I feel there is higher likelihood it will be misused to censor people who are potentially flagging problematic issues, rather than do anything else. So let me just stop there. Yeah. Meghna,
Yeah,
if you
just
have
to come
any
in.
information on how
I
you
mean,
interpret.
just to build on what you're saying, the thing is that now it's not really only complaints and grievances, it says matters. So how we have interpreted it is that it's not only on the basis of complaints and grievances, because let's remember the IDC was a third tier mechanism. It was like an appellate mechanism, in a sense that if self-regulation or the appellate committee did not resolve a user's complaint, it would go to the IDC, or sorry, the ministry could also refer a complaint there. Now it has become matter, which means that the IDC could possibly take it on suo moto. So they can decide essentially completely, not on the basis of any complaint or anyone else saying anything, but themselves, what is right, what is wrong in this very, very broad ambit of news and current affairs content. So that is the difference that I see, that now it's not only on the basis of a complaint, it can be anything basically that they want to take up, they can take up now. That's why the word matter matters over here. The other thing that I've seen over here, or the other kind of issue that I saw, is that on um I mean, back to 14, 15 and 16, which is basically blocking. It's not really going to change. I agree with Rohit there. It's not, I don't know how much it's going to impact people coming forward or saying anything, but maybe to the extent where if someone is treated as a publisher, again, it's unclear because for publishers, the intermediary is supposed to publish details about that person. So basically, the person's identity has to be revealed. So I don't know to what extent now that applies to this.
Maybe the
So
point is
that
it's
is,
a mess.
it's
It's
a mess. Yeah, it's a confusing mess. It is a confusing mess. I mean, like Rohit, we were also reading it again and again and again and trying to understand the implications because, like I said, there have been so many litigations that have come and have kind of changed the status of the rules. And of course, this is going to be litigated on as well. So it is, yeah, it is, I mean, just a chaotic mess. I don't know what is hoped to be achieved with this because it is definitely going to be challenged if it comes into force. But yeah, stop there.
All right, thank you so much. On that note, I think it's a, it's a good note to end on, that it's just a chaotic hot mess. So yeah, thank you so much, guys. And Anisha will just once again jump in to tell the technicalities.